I was working on never being a child's last coach.
And what would help us even more is if you choose to subscribe. This episode is brought to you by Cool Play.
In the world of coaching, few names resonate with as much respect and admiration as John Kessel, who has reshaped how the world teaches sport. A Hall of Fame coach from Olympians, pros and kids across 65 nations, John's uncovered what most coaches still get wrong.
John, it's great to be here with you today. How are you?
It's a great day to be alive here in Colorado.
Welcome to Cool Conversations, and thank you for joining during what I know has been a busy period for you with travel and being with our schedules and everything. This really is a conversation worth waiting for. So let's do it. You've traversed the sports coaching spectrum from youth sports to at grassroots level to adaptive play to professional sports, coaching many of the best volleyball players in the country and indeed the world. But you've literally created a path for so many people to not only build their own craft but to influence the whole industry in the way that you work in helping athletes become their best. And I'd love to go back a bit and really get the origin story, because I know you from reputation, and that reputation is one of you're the go-to for helping coaches become the best teachers they can be, and no matter what their level is. And so you've carved out this unique path over decades with amazing insights and wisdom. And where did all that start?
Wow, I guess it started because my mom was a first grade teacher. And, for 40 years, she taught kids to love learning. And I think right out of the gate, both parents and coaches should understand that in the end, this is really not so much an athletic competition. It's a learning competition. And the way I used to coach 50 years ago and the way I coach and teach now has transformed into not a world of right or wrong. I used to think it was sort of black and white. No, that's wrong. This is right. And now it's more, look, here's what I did 50 years ago. Here's what I'm doing now. Do you see how this is more effective? And it's that rather than be the command style coach telling them what to do or whatever, it's that guiding of their discovery of whatever sport they've chosen. I kind of laugh when I think of all the sports I've worked with. The most fun one was an international keynote speech to the International Synchronized Swimming Symposium at the Olympic Training Center here in Colorado Springs. And there were 300 coaches from all over the world, 299 women and a guy from Venezuela. And here I was, this guy talking to all these women synchronized swimming. But the principles of learning, the principles of helping a kid love the game that they've chosen, the principles of just more effective learning and efficient learning, they go across the board. It doesn't matter if I'm talking like I have to the National Hockey League people or to the NFL here in the US, or I'm working with the Cleveland Guardians in baseball. And principles are principles of how you learn a sport. And young John did a lot of practicing for practice, I would call it, Claire. I wanted practice to look pretty, and so we did these things that we could count that they did these and they did that or whatever. But it wasn't based in reality. It was based in making the practice look good, not this will actually occur in a match, because most of what I was doing wouldn't occur in a game. So I was practicing what we say, practicing for practice, not for performance. And that is where I've been kind of helping others discover the path of being comfortable with failure, because it happens in learning. I mean, a really great example, Claire, I think for parents and coaches is, how did you learn to ride a bike? Okay. Everybody listening in probably knows how to ride a bike. So I'm going to And kids, sadly, around the world, probably they die annually learning to ride a bike because they ride out into traffic, or they have. In volleyball, my world, kids don't die playing volleyball. They may die in more, you know, challenging sports, but not in volleyball. Nobody's ever died playing volleyball. And so we have coaches in volleyball. Kids die in bike riding. So I'm going to ask you, you know how to ride a bike?
I do.
Okay. So your parents love you and taught you to ride a bike. Did they hire a bike riding coach?
They did not.
Did they send you to bike riding summer camp?
They did not.
How many bike riding drills did you do to learn to ride the bike, where you literally were drilling riding the bike?
Categorically zero.
Yeah. And you learn to ride this pretty challenging thing called a bike, you know, where it wobbles and stuff. And I would encourage you on a totally different platform called motor learning, which could be another podcast on this stuff. How do you learn in the motor skill? Go Google the backwards bicycle and look at this guy who's ridden the bike for 35 years. They change one gear on the bike on the handles, so when he turns right, the wheel goes left. Otherwise, it's his bike, an identical bike he's ridden for years. It takes him 8 months to learn to ride the backwards bike, even though he was a bike rider. And it's the principle of what we call specificity in training, and why you want to train in reality, whatever your sport is. If you know, you want to train in what is real and not in what is practice looking good. And I would include things like speed ladders and all these other things that, yeah, I look good, I feel good because I can run through this speed ladder, but it's not changing my ability to run faster in hurling, or run faster in any, you know, game that I'm doing. It's teaching me to run through a ladder faster. That's all. It's practicing for practice and not for performance. So, enough said. What's up?
That is brilliant. And that really sounds like it's a first principle. If we take the learning for learning's purpose sake as part of learning skills. And I really would love to drill down into that idea of motor learning, and that the concept of doing drills for the sake of drills versus maybe more game scenario and specifics within reality. Could you help me understand, when you say that we're practicing for real life and in reality, what does that look like?
Well, you know, again, I have a primary focus on volleyball. Right. Where a coach will set up a net, okay, and then literally not use the net for half a practice. They'll practice in front of it. They'll practice in pairs. They'll put the ball back and forth. They'll set in triangles. The coach will stand in front of the net and spike balls, and they'll dig balls. And the ball never goes over the net. But in every match ever played, from 8-year-old to Olympic, the first ball comes over the net, a thing called a serve, and then it goes towards the net. The setter then sets it along the net, and the third ball has to go over the net again. It has to go over this barrier that's there all the time. But as a young John, I practiced in front of the net for 2/3 of my practice, maybe. And I was making it look good because the net wasn't in the way to make me fail. It was gone. And so I looked good. And yeah, I'm looking really good. But as soon as we went in the game, they couldn't do anything. I think in a lot of our sports that your coaches and parents are listening maybe from, the number one skill in volleyball, and probably a lot of other sports, is the skill of reading. It's not actually a technique. It's this getting in the right place at the right time in advance of what's happening. And in my sport, you don't get a hold on to the ball. You know, it has to rebound. I mean, it rebounds so fast off of your hand when you spike that it takes 100 spikes before you touch a ball for 1 second. Because it's 100th of a second in contact time. It hits it and then it's gone and it's no longer being touched. So as a young coach, I talked about wrist snap and top spin and all these things. And top spin exists, but it's not what I used to think, that my hand made the ball spin. It's where I was hitting the sphere, and I had to hit the sphere in that hundredth of a second in the right place at the right time. Well, most of the people listening in, they get to correct the error by holding on to it, and in basketball, looking around until you have to send it somewhere else. But in volleyball, you don't get to do that. You have to read really, really well to then send it to the right place. If that's so important as read, why would I stand in front of the net and throw balls, which I did for years, so that everybody was hustling and chasing down balls? But no ball ever starts at the below the net and flies out into the court. It comes over the net and falls. So I was making practice look pretty, but they never could read when the bad guys did a tip, because it wasn't happening. It was me throwing a ball, And I brought that into the Guardians not that long ago, a few years ago, when I went to their spring training. Excuse me. And I watched the jug machine pitching to a catcher who was making a move. They were catching it and getting ready to throw it to first or something. And I watched for a little bit, and then I talked to Luke, the catcher coach. I said, Luke, how often do they do this move without a batter in the way? And the answer was never in the history of baseball. Okay, then can you take some of those catchers and keep them in their gear, but have them stand like a batter and get in the way? Because this is looking pretty because there's nobody in the way, but there's going to be somebody in the way all the time when they do this. So put somebody in the way. So they did that. And then I watched a little bit, and I said, who's dropping the ball into the jug machine? The machine that sends the pitch flying to the catcher. And he kind of laughed, and he goes, well, they're all Golden Glove, MVP, former Cleveland, athletes that are now coaching. I said, do you think they coach really well from the jug machine, or would they be better if they were standing behind the catcher like an umpire and giving feedback there rather than way out here where the pitch is coming from? And he goes, well, of course they'd be better. Well, then get some of those other catchers to come drop the ball and have your coach stand behind and see the same thing that the catcher's seeing and give feedback. And so he whistled and did that. And then I waited a few more minutes, and I said, so why are they just going and getting ready to throw it? How can we get them to throw it? Because they're doing a progression. They're doing a part. And when parts are broken down, they look good, but you got to do the whole skill, like in bicycling. Going back to Claire, did you learn to ride a bike by pedaling right-footed 30 times and then pedaling left-footed 30 times and then one hand on the handlebar and another? No, you rode the bike, the whole bike. It's called whole training. And you guys have some awesome lead instructors and teachers in all of the UK, but especially I think in Ireland, that understand these principles of ecological dynamics and constraint-based learning. And if anybody listening hasn't talked about either of those topics, go down the rabbit hole and find out about those things. But essentially, it's training in reality and then constraining it so that it's still real, but not as complex in its reality, and thinning it out. So in my country, going back to my bike riding idea, we used to use training wheels, and they're still out there, I'm sure. And that all the research that we've seen shows that using training wheels slows down the learning of how to ride a bike. You get good rid of the training wheels, but you don't know how to ride the bike yet. So now when you buy a bike to learn to ride, at least in the US, almost all of the things are balance bikes, where you do the reality of balance, which is how you ride a bike. And there's no training wheels anymore. But we had the training wheels for 50 years, making the part of bicycle riding look good, but not the whole of the skill. And so as soon as you went to the whole of the skill, you had to learn to ride the bike then, not during the pieces of the skill of training wheels. So he said, yeah. And he put another catcher out over here to pretend to throw the third, and another catcher over here to pretend to throw the second, and another catcher over here. And they actually threw the ball and they had to then throw the ball around the batter. And I said, make sure the batter does things that they would do in a game to make the catcher struggle and not do as well in throwing the ball to the whatever base they're throwing it to. And that's at the pro level. Okay. I mean, that's at the millions of dollars level,
Right. Right.
let alone little kid level. So, I mean, your cool play, the key word being play, but your play on words with cool, I call it volleyball math. And you could probably say volleyball, or you could probably say any sport math. If there's 4 kids and a ball, what happens? And the answer is they play. They play 2-on-2. In football, I'm sure it's the same thing, Okay, 4 kids, a ball, and an adult, and what starts to happen? And the answer is they drill.
Yeah.
They practice. They don't play. And cool play is focusing on that inspiration for kids in playing, because the game really does teach the game. In my world, I talk to the BBC. I have a 30 or 40 pound check from the BBC that I never cashed, because it was like, how cool is this? I'm talking to the BBC and they're paying me to talk. So it was about beach volleyball.
Okay.
And the whole topic was basically about, the game that is an Olympic sport now of 2-on-2. Well, that is the secret to playing good indoor 6-on-6. My son plays professionally over in Europe. He played for Berlin for half a decade, and now he's in Belgium playing for Greenyard Massic. And, he's a national team player, the last kid cut from the Paris roster. So at one end, I can talk about what it's like to be the best you can be and fall short of that last slot. But he understands that he had a blast playing internationally all over the world for the U.S. and beating Brazil and, blah, blah, blah. But that joy of giving them a love of the game, that's our job as a coach. And I think you had a presenter on earlier that said, hey, talk to this John guy, because he said this sentence, which is basically to never be a child's last coach. That's how you measure your true success, as the 99%. I mean, yes, there's Olympians, and yes, there's national team players, and that's that 1%. But 99% of the people listening to this conversation, and parents who's got a 12-year-old or whatever, they're working hard to figure out, how do I get my kid to be the best they can be and love the game, without necessarily knowing that they're going to be at the elite level. So in my sport of doubles, going back to that world, we too quickly get kids to play the adult game.
Right.
Instead of letting them play a small-sided game of any variety, whether it's cross ice or ice hockey or anything, just the games of smaller-sided 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 3-on-3, which is an Olympic sport in basketball now. So, just like doubles volleyball has helped indoor play, you want your kid, until they're probably about 14, to not specialize and to play as many smaller-sided games as possible in the reality of the sport that you've chosen, so that they learn to read and get into the right place at the right time and get the contacts. It's horrible. The thing that drives me crazy is we force this 6-on-6 game of volleyball onto kids that are 12, and you've got 6 kids on the bench and 6 kids on the other side, and they're playing each other. You've got 24 kids playing with one ball over the net. 23 are watching. One touches and gets some understanding, but the other 23 are watching until it's their chance. And, half of them can't even touch the ball because they're on the bench. And I understand that we learn things by watching, because we do. Our eyes and our brain connect and we see ideas that are really important. But in the motor skill, in the ability to do something, you have to do it, not watch it. And so the example I often use is anybody who has a kid who's learned to drive a car. Okay, you got a 16-year-old driving the car. When they first start to drive, do they know how to drive the car? No. But what have they done for 16 years? They've watched you drive the car. They've been watching you drive a car for their entire life. But until they sit behind the wheel and start to drive and do their foot on the pedal and the brake and everything in the seat, that's when they learn to drive. And your insurance rates start off incredibly high. And as they learn to drive, your insurance rates go down and down and down, because you learn by driving, not by watching someone drive. So this small-sided 2-on-2 option in my sport, my dad played in the 40s after World War II. He was a captain in the Navy and played a lot of doubles volleyball. So he taught me some of the game. And I played 2-on-2, and my son played 2-on-2 until he was probably about 15. And in all that way, nobody had a coach. The game was just teaching the game. We were figuring out, how do you win this point? How do you solve it? But you're getting the reps, because if you and I are playing, Claire, and they serve you because you're not a good receiver, you're going to get good at receiving. They serve you because I'm a bad setter. Well, I'm going to get better at setting. And if they serve me because I'm a bad hitter, I'm going to get better at hitting that third hit. By doing, not by watching.
I really love that example, and it reminds me of the Belgian Federation in soccer and their approach when they revamped it a number of years ago to small-sided games, developmentally appropriate, exactly like you're talking about. And then in recent years, we've seen the output of some amazing stars, yes, at the elite level, but their participation grew because the reps that the kids were getting, the engagement they were getting, was just so key. And as you're pointing to, that's fundamental to motor learning and the X's and the O's of the sport, but also in the context of the game. So they're playing in the reality of the game and small-sided. So I can absolutely see, the application of that. If we look to youth sports as it currently is at the moment, when we look to create an experience for the kids, can you describe what kind of experience that we want to create as coaches for young kids in sport? And maybe more specifically, what does practice look like for a 6, 7, or 8-year-old, so that we can bring that joy to them and develop these capacities?
Volleyball is specifically very challenging at that age because of the rebound aspect. I don't think my son really started to play volleyball until he was about 10. Nor did my daughters. They, right around there, they started to play 2-on-2. Prior to that, they were playing football and they were playing basketball. And in my family, my children's case, they played 10 sports growing up before they chose themselves to play volleyball. Yeah, they got a dad that does volleyball. I understand that. But if he had gone off and done basketball, I would have been happy, or whatever, he chose to do. But it's that idea of sports sampling that I think all of us as people who care about kids should maybe even bring that into our own sport. When I do volleyball, we do some football. We do some basketball. We let them experience it, you might say, because time is precious, not for hours, but why not just play football as your warm-up for 10 minutes or 5 minutes and see. It just so happens that in volleyball. Your whole body has been legal to contact and save a ball since 1996. But if any volleyball coach is listening to this, and I ask you, how much time in practice do you train anything but your, arm and hand contact? And the answer again is usually zero. They don't ever kick a ball up or knee it up or head it up, even though those are legal in volleyball. They don't practice it. They just work on their hands and work on their passing and stuff, or jumping and hitting with their hand again. And this sports sampling idea of, being able to do some field hockey as a warm up, and, field hockey, I don't know where you get the sticks. When I'm in Vanuatu, I go out and get bamboo out of the forest. There's a lot of countries where there's a lot of things that you can improvise to give a kid a different experience. But all that said, I think the most important thing, Claire, is the kid. Kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care about them. So you have to take time in the beginning of your season learning about who the kid is, each kid. And that's because if you work on the person, the skill will develop. I promise it will. If you work on the skill, the person may not develop. My job is to develop amazing leaders. My job is to develop kids that are resilient and, love, like you talk about in Cool Play, love being active. And I think about that in the sense that one of my thought patterns to it is physical punishment is often brought in as a learning tool device. And I simply don't understand how you can help a kid who loves to run and then say, because you lost that game, you must do sprints. Or make physical punishment be part of learning. And so again, I go back to the big picture. If physical punishment was a effective, efficient, better way to help somebody learn a motor skill, and that, because that's why you're doing it, that's why I did it in the 70s, then if that was the case, then when you mix the two chemicals together wrong in the chemistry lab, your professor would tell you to drop and give me 20 push-ups. Or if you misspelled cat, your teacher would tell you to run a sprint or, do physical punishment because it's effective learning device, but it's not. They don't do it because it doesn't work there, and it doesn't work in chemistry, and it really doesn't belong in sport. But it's out there because, and I can send this to you, Claire. I was greatly impacted by an article in 1984 in a Discover magazine called Decisions. And it was written about Dr. Daniel Kahneman, who's written some amazing books, Thinking Fast and Slow, and he's passed away recently, but he ended up winning a Nobel Peace Prize on how humans make faulty reasoning. He was an Israeli psychologist mathematician, and he saw how people were being fooled by what's called regression to the mean. So to anybody listening here, if you do 5 out of 10, Claire, in shooting, okay, so you're a pretty good shooter, 50%, you're canny, and you go on a 10 in a row streak, putting in 10 shots in a row, should I praise you, punish you, or ignore you as your teacher, as your coach? A good coach would praise you. You just did 10 in a row. The problem is with this mathematical scientific fact of regression to the mean, in the next 10, because you shoot 5 out of 10 normally. In the next 10, what will you probably do? And the answer is 5 out of 10. You don't go 0 out of 10 because you just did 10 out of 10. No, the next shot, you're going to be 50-50, and that next one and next one. But what I saw as a young coach was that I jinxed you, or I broke your concentration, or I did all this stuff, because I would praise you after you did 10 straight, catching you being good, rather than the old John used to catch them only when they were being bad. Now it's simple, catch them being good. So I catch you being good, knowing that in the next 10, you probably are going to do 5 out of 10, and not thinking that I jinxed you or that I broke your concentration or I shouldn't have praised you, because I should.
Right.
Okay, so I do that. The reason it's so important, and I'm mentioning it here in this podcast, is because on the flip side, young John would see somebody do 0 out of 10 or 1 out of 10. And I would go, substitution. Claire, get over there and get on the bench. Just sit there and think about how you're, God, I can't believe it. You know, your grandmother's dying of cancer and she's here watching you and you're missing all these shots. What's wrong with you? And I might even say, drop and give me 20 push-ups. And, you know, you'll do 20 push-ups and all these other things as a young coach, getting angry at your being a human, because you're a human. You're not perfect. You make mistakes as part of learning. And so the reason the story is important, I think, is after I sub you out, after I shame you, after I put you on the bench and, you know, hang on you, in the next 10, when I say, all right, Clara, you ready to get back in here and show me what you're made of? All right, get back out there. And you get back out there. Mathematically, statistically, probably, what are you going to do in the next 10? 5 out of 10. You're going to do 5 out of 10. And I get to say, sitting you on the bench and making you think about it really worked. Making you do those sit-ups really helped you get back in the game. And it's all bullshit. It's not fact. It's not science. And Kahneman won the Nobel Peace Prize on how we struggle to understand some of these things. In this case, the principle of regression to the mean. So
that is really powerful story, John. And you're really touching on the power of praise and the timing of praise as well. And if we could go deeper into that, in looking for ways to catch people doing and kids to doing the right things, and reinforcing those, because feedback is an important factor to this learning and changing behavior. Could you draw on your insights, your experience, especially when we're looking at kids, and what you would say around feedback and praise, what coaches should be cognizant of in daily practice? Because it's how we give praise and it's when we give praise. And there's a sense of, you know, sometimes, oh, good job, well done. But the child knows the difference when the praise carries meaning and weight. Could you maybe touch on some of those areas?
Sure. So there's 3 things that jumped out in your question. The first is, the greatest coach I've ever seen is a guy named John Wooden. His book, They Call Me Coach, is fantastic. His Pyramid of Success, we still follow often. Yeah, ESPN magazine, I think, rated him as the #1 coach in the first 50 years of sport in America. So he's a pretty good role model to follow. And in a research study on him, they found that 76% of his wording to his athletes was specific. So you said just before, a coach says, good job. And there was a little bit of the concern about it being real or not real. But I'd be more concerned about being specific about why you're saying that's it, why you're saying good job, why you're saying what I did in the 70s. Good, way to go.
Right.
So when we say that's it, anybody listening, I'd love you to put in a comma and fill in the blank on the it, so that you're specific to why you're saying that's it. That you're specific to why you're saying good job. Otherwise, you're not going to be as effective, because The kids should turn to you and go, "This it you're talking about. Care to be more specific?" you know. So that's part of it, as I see it. At the same time, I'll go again. I'm going to be young John. I walk into a gym. I cross my arms. I've turned on my coaching radar, and I'm looking around the gym, and I'm coming up to you, Claire. Probably, why am I coming up to you? Because you did it right or you did it wrong.
Wrong.
And I'm here to help because I'm your coach. And so I go, blah, 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 and then my radar identifies another error, and I go over and talk about that to that coach. Because I coach coaches, after young John left, catching you being wrong and giving you some feedback, or even more importantly, on a totally different plane, when we give feedback, we talk about something that can't be changed. It's already happened.
Okay. Yeah.
I'd like people to consider the concept of feed forward.
Okay.
To give you information on something that you can act on in the future. Not how you did that wrong, but what you need to do, and not me telling you what to do, but you eliciting questioning you until you give me the answer. Because if it comes from me, like it happens so often in my sport, you get a whole team of kids who will go play a ball, make a mistake, and the next thing you know is their head does that. And they do something, and then they go like that. Because all the answers come from the coach on the bench, instead of them being able to problem solve their own information. So young John caught you being bad and then went off, and under your breath you say something like this, and I'm listening because I'm coaching the coaches. Do 10 right. Where the hell is he? Nowhere. Make one mistake, and where is he? Right there. And that's what they're saying after you leave. And it's a principle of summary feedback in motor learning. When good coaches coach, they don't isolate single contacts. They look for repeated contacts, and if 4 are right and 1 is wrong, they don't talk about the 1 wrong. They talk about the 4 that are right. If they do 3 right and 2 wrong, you don't talk about the 2 wrong. You still talk about the right. It's probably not until you get to 1 right and 4 wrong that I would be addressing maybe what needs to be done in the next contact. As long as I know that the intent and outcome is different. It's really, I think the wiser you get as a coach, the more you can see an athlete's intent over the outcome. And if the outcome is bad, but their intent is good, just stay on the intent. The outcome is part of failure. It's part of learning. It's part of making mistakes. How many times did you fall riding that darn bike? A lot of times. And I never saw a parent teaching bike riding, and then after you made a mistake, say, give me push-ups, or, or any of that stuff we were kind of talking about. Any parent after you fell tend to care for you and come up and help you, not punish you or get mad at you. Some parents, I'm sure, got mad at you because you fell. But that's not effective teaching, right. AKA parenting. It's not as effective as catching them being good and staying on them when they do it right, and ignoring the multitude of failures that are going to happen as part of learning. I mean, it's just, Bill Neville, one of our great coaches, says, the gym, and of course the field is the same thing, is an exploratorium where you just explore. And when you do things you've never done before, you're going to fail. And you just have to be comfortable with failure. That's all there is to it.
And that sounds like a core principle, first principle for you in that umbrella of learning, that mistakes are part of that learning and those errors are inevitable. In almost, we want to encourage them. And then the feedback is tied into that strength-based approach, emphasizing the things that are going right when the intent is good and praising that. I'm curious then, is there language around that that you might suggest to consider for coaches? What type of language? And again, if we think about maybe younger kids versus the adults pros, but for kids, what kind of language? We're talking about it being a bit specific, but if we're praising the efforts that we see that the intent is good and they're getting some efforts right, how scenario-based real life setting, what would you say you might say to a child or in that scenario where we're really trying to, yes, give specific feedback, but also foster the motivation, the encouragement, the joy?
Um, a great question. And I heard a couple things in there that I guess I would address in my language first as a coach. So the first
Yeah,
concept is, if I drew a picture of, I don't know if I could do it for you. I think I can do it here.
let's try.
My question would be, who is this? So who is that? Although I think it has a bunch of my writing
Yeah,
behind it, but and
okay,
the answer is that that's the ideal coach.
okay.
Okay, God gave us two ears and two eyes and one mouth for a reason. So I love this word wait. And wait means, in our language of English, why am I talking? I should probably wait and not talk so much. So if I do that, then we get to the words that I use when I interact with kids. And in your conversation or your question to me today, you use the word try, I think, twice. And I would argue pretty strongly to just get rid of that word. I've got a call coming in, but I'm going to delete it. Doink. Hang up on that thing. um, if I said this talk's going to be at 9 a.m. tomorrow, and I told you I would try and make it, what did I really say to you in humanness? That I'm not going to come.
That you're not
Party
going to.
players at 8 o'clock tonight. I'll try and be there. What did I say? I'm not coming. Then when I see you, I say, oh, I tried. But I like to kind of, help the kids understand that and it's kind of Yoda, I suppose, but either you do it or you don't. There really is no try. And so here's the pen. And if I say, try to pick it up, and this is picked up and this is not picked up, try to pick it up. They either go like this, and I get to say, you haven't picked it up. Or they go like this, and I go, no, you picked it up. I want you to show me what trying looks like. Well, then they go like this. And I go, no, you haven't picked it up. So this conversation of party at your place, I'll try and be there. Try is an excuse to not do it. It gives you a bailout. So just get rid of it and simply say, I want you to do this. I'm looking for 1 out of 10 because it's a new thing they've never done, and be happy with, I'm looking just for 1 out of 10. I know you can do it. And let's go for 1 out of 10. And if they do 2 out of 10, you're really excited, and they are too. The second thing that your question brought to my mind is, too often we are the source of all knowledge, as I've said before, rather than saying to the kids, how could we make this more fun? Say to the kid, I'm going to do this. Is there any way to make this even more fun? And let the kids influence you rather than bring this adult concept. Let them, and it may not even be based in reality at that moment, But if it's fun, let it happen, because you're there to engage them and dialogue with them, and even if they're young, and find out what they love to do. Now, I can say, as I travel around the world, I'm amazed at how some countries are much better than my country at understanding the principle of that which you teach, you learn, because that's a principle. So if you have to teach it, my friends that are residents and stuff here say, in residency, we see one, we do one, and the third thing we do is we teach it, as they learn whatever doctoring skills they have. So in doing one slash, how can you get kids to be the coaches? Because it comes to mind, because it's a lot easier for a 14-year-old to understand what a 11-year-old is doing in an exercise or a game or even a drill than it is for me at 70 plus years old. It's been a long time since I was 12. So getting the kids to teach younger kids. And when I was older, I understood that, or younger, I understood it, but I was doing college age or 18-year-olds coaching the younger kids. And now I've come to realize that if you bring your group in of 14-year-olds an hour early and have them coach the 12-year-olds, that it's a win-win. The 12s see somebody that's just 2 years older than them helping them, and the 14-year-olds are getting better because they're learning things by teaching it. And we often talk about a coaching shortage. You just need one adult to be there and overseeing it. You don't need, you bring in the kids and they can do all the other coaching. And you may, you're there to be the adult in the room and keep things safe and organized. But young kids, helping young kids is what happens at recess. That's how everybody teaches each other how to compete and things. So I think we just need to tap in and let kids understand more about how to teach the game and listen to their ideas. And my last thought on it, Claire, is that as a young coach, I thought my job was to solve problems.
Okay.
So I solved problems. I told them what to do. I was the wise human in the gym. And, like I said, everybody would then look to me for all the answers. And now I've come to realize that my biggest job is to create problems for them to solve. And, that's my job. They have to create problems and solve them. And because it's, different sports have different ways of training and learning. Sometimes, that can be a job. But I think as powerful and wonderful as AI and the internet is, when I typed in volleyball drill into Google, I was stunned at the number. Because when I grew up in the 70s, when the book 300 plus volleyball drills came out, I was in heaven. 300 plus drills. And then 2 years later, second edition came out with 400 plus more volleyball drills. So as a young coach, I was a collector of drills. Well, now you go to the internet and you type in volleyball drill and you get 32 million choices, for God's sakes. 32 million choices. Well, my job now is to critically think, these things that people are showing me to possibly do, is that the most effective use of my time? And in the vast majority, 99%, it's not. Our national team right now probably does under 10 drills. That's it, even though we have 32 million choices. And even though there are people who will tell you and show you and create drills, 99% of them aren't game-like enough, and you're practicing, back to where we talked about, for practice and not to perform.
I think that's such a
we
crucial
look good, but we can't play for shit.
Yes, and that's such a crucial point because what are your thoughts on the idea that those drills, those book of drills, give some coaches comfort, in the sense that I feel like there's a sense that I feel like I'm doing good by the kids. I'm giving them a drill, I'm developing their skills, and maybe arguably for myself, and this would have been me as a younger coach. I feel good about myself because I'm doing this, and it's more for myself than actually the benefit of the kids
Uh-huh.
and or the athlete in that case. And so a key point that I'm taking for this for a lot of coaches that I've worked with and educators, it's not about the drills, and we can take space from that. And just like you learn a bike, riding a bike, back to this idea of free play and gameplay, and not feeling that we have to early specialize in the fear that the child will miss out if they're not getting those drills and volleyball skills at age 4, that we can let go of those thoughts.
Yeah, I know, absolutely, Claire. I mean, specialization is for insects. It's not for humans. You know, it's it's a human. I think it's Robert Heinlein. Humans should be able to, cook a meal and ride a bike and comfort the dying and coach children. That's what specialization is for insects. And in my son and daughter's cases, they played all these sports growing up, and that gave them just a more, not just well-rounded, but it put less stress on their body because they didn't just do the same one sport. And that part I think is really important too. So thinking back to your kids, I've recently come to think about how when I was a young coach, I would criticize, I would catch them being bad, right? And now I realize that I'm going to ask you, Claire, would you rather be criticized or challenged?
Absolutely challenged.
Yeah. So it may be something that you think is important, and that's your choice as a coach, but create it as a challenge, create it as a problem to solve, not criticize them. That's why I said at the beginning, I think before we even started taping, that for anybody listening here today, everything I'm giving you in my mind's eye is information. It's not criticism, other than criticism of me, young John, who didn't, do enough learning about learning and didn't realize how athletes, they don't care about a lot of things, but they will always remember how you made them feel. And so we need to be addressing the whole person, not the player, the whole kid. And I don't know, it's just, for me, the phrase is drills are the drugs of coaches. That's what they are. And they like shoot them up, and they, like you said earlier, they feel better after they got those those drugs going on and stuff. But it goes back to that thing we talked about how would I measure young John. I can say that unknowingly I was working on never being a child's last coach. Unknowingly. Maybe it's because my mom was a first grade teacher. I don't know. That my greatest losses were the kids who dropped out of sport after I coached them. And that was a small number, but that was a really serious number. I would rather have my child play for a coach who goes 0-30 and every kid plays the next year the sport that they were teaching, versus a coach who is 30-0 and half the kids quit after that training. That's not good coaching in my sort of humble opinion. It's just that never being a child's last coach. And really, when you tie back that back into a concept, the only kids who don't get better are the ones who don't come. Not everybody's getting better at the same rate, but if they don't come, They can't get better. And so you've got to create a reason to come and reason to have fun and a reason to play and, love this game. If anybody watches my son play, you can Google it, Cody Kessel or whatever. He plays with a profound joy of playing,
How
even though
did
he's a
you
pro.
Right. Now, that is the thing that we would say that is missing from kids today. And part of the reason that they drop out and they don't even enter. How would you say to a coach, to a parent, how do you foster that joy? Because that's not that's more rare than we actually give credit for. And the fact that he has it at a pro level, but how do we foster that joy?
Yeah, I think many of the things we've been talking about, I'll go back to some of the language I used.
Right.
Uh, there's a word that I used to use a ton, and the word is don't.
Okay.
Okay. Um, so I don't want you to, don't think about a pink elephant, Claire.
I'm thinking about a pink elephant.
Okay. So if we want to get kids to do something, we need to eliminate that word in our teaching and simply say what it is that we're striving for or what we want, not the word don't. Another word that I would change pretty powerfully is the word but. You know, that's a pretty cool looking top you have on, Claire. But what's coming next?
Negative.
Okay. If I said simply, and so even though I say the top looks cool, I say but, and we close down. At any age, in any language, it's not English, it's the word but. Um, as a teacher, I will have more effectiveness and I will have more fun and I will get more learning happening if I change the word but to and. That's a pretty cool top you've got on. And you can still hear that I think it's a good top.
Yeah. Yeah.
My culture is to say but, and I need to simply get rid of that word and say and. Um, I think a really important word to say in the gym a lot is yet. I can't do this. And you look at them and you go, yet. That's all. It's just a matter of time. You're gonna see. I can't do it for you, but I'll be there for you. That's something that took me a little while to understand. You know.
That's so powerful. And John, what's striking me as you're talking that maybe we haven't yet touched on is there's a bridge between the learning and how you're fostering that learning through language and the X's and the O's, but the warmth that you're carrying. Um, so your approach to
Basically, what I was saying is that the people who don't get the benefits of play and sport are the people who are afraid to go risk failure in front of others or even in just a one-on-one, tennis or rally or whatever. And it's my job to simply be excited about them being out there and not sitting watching the television or sitting on the couch eating bonbons or whatever. So some of the answers might be found in the following statement for kids. There's a line that kids often say, Coach, when do we get to blank? And whatever that blank is, in my sport, it's play. And in my sport, it's spike. Even though I need to be able to receive the serve and then set the ball up for the spike to occur, they love to spike. And so I need to make sure that that's happening every practice. And other sports have those same things that when a kid says, Coach, when do we get to blank? Listen to what they fill that in with and go do it more. It's not rocket science. It's pretty simple. And I think kids who feel appreciated always do more than is expected. And that goes back to that thing I said at the beginning, that kids don't care how much you know about blank sport until they know how much you care about who they are and what they're about and stuff. So I think all of this sort of wraps up into, it's a really fun time to go into the gym or go onto the field and play, and let the game kind of teach the game maybe more than I used to. I don't know. I think there's some sports that aren't necessarily lifetime sports. Volleyball happens to be one of them. I mean, we have an 80 and over national championships at USA Volleyball. And so with an 80 and over nationals, you got 70 more years to get better, kid. So take your time getting better. In other sports, it's not so much that way. And, a little sidebar that comes to mind, is that there's a culture, at least in volleyball, where the teams referee each other, except for being the head referee. They're the second referee. They're the line judges. They're they in a head to head. They one other team sitting out, and they're helping referee the match. Not everybody is going to be fantastic at as a player, size or weight or speed or whatever is getting in the way of them being at that highest level. So two things came to mind when I did this clinic in Bangkok. And, we had 16 nations, we had 35 coaches. It was a wonderful 2 weeks of sharing and growing, the game and stuff. But what I found, I came to realize that there were some of these coaches that were there because they were so good at statistics, which is part of the higher level of coaching. And that skill level, they weren't players, but they were really good at gathering the data that is becoming more and more about our world, as things get able to be collected. So at the higher end, there's that opportunity to be a statistician, data person. And there's also a place for players who might not be good enough, who can become referees. I have friends that have, played all over the world, and I have officials who have traveled all over the world because they chose to not stay in the playing path, but to become the best official of that sport that they could be. And they get these amazing opportunities. I mean, we have international scorekeepers who get to travel the world doing international scorekeeping, and they're 18 years old. But they're so good at scorekeeping that, that's what they chose to do. And do they still get out and hack around a little bit of volleyball? Sure, they're players, but they're not 1% players, but they become kind of 1% in scorekeeping and some of the roles within a sport. So, and that's final thing came up. It's not so much sports sampling, Claire, but if you have to, this is a really important principle. Long-term athletic development is simply the job of a sport program to keep as many kids as long as possible in as safe and as healthy of an environment of learning as possible. Any program listening here who is cutting kids at 16 and under really needs to come up with a way to not cut kids at 16 and under, to somehow keep them, even if it's only once a week versus 3 times a week or whatever. Because when you do that, when you cut kids at 13 and 14 and 16, you're cutting kids that haven't reached their potential yet, even close, because biology doesn't know birthdays. And so we force this on it. And you can see a lot of research where the kids that get the most attention are the ones that are born January, February, and March in football and in ice hockey. And yeah, it exists because of the attention of us. And the kids that are in October, November, December are the kids that can blossom into being great athletes. But because they're behind this January 1 birth date that many sports follow, they get cut when they actually will develop into being a great kid if you can just keep them longer and not cut them, but come up with a way for them to continue contributing or experiencing your sport until they get a little bit older. And that final concept is not, like I said, sports sampling, but to come up with a way that if you do have to cut a kid, I think it's our duty as a program to provide alternative physical activity pathways that they might not know. That's our job. That's what we're supposed to be doing. When we cut somebody, when we say you're done, it may be there's another club that needs you and you stay in the sport. But I think of a kid that I cut when I was working in Australia with the national team program, Joanne Moore, and 6'1", strong, but not a great jump, and couldn't necessarily play against China, Japan, Korea, and get out of the zone that they're in Asia. So we, had to cut her. But I told her parents and her, I said, I've talked to women's water polo, and I've talked to rowing, and I've talked to team handball. And your athleticism and body, all three of those sports would love to take a look at you. And so she went first to rowing, got on the ergometer, broke the record, and within 4 months was in the gold medal winning fours boat, setting a world championship gold medal from being cut from the sport that she loved the most, but providing a way to be more still physical with myself after this program or this training situation says we have to, quote, cut you. So I think that's a duty of programming.
Gift, John. What a gift. And what's striking me about that is the example of go back to our conversation on sports specialization. In just a blink of an eye, the transferability of skills into another domain, another sport at an adult level should be evidence enough to parents and to other coaches of the possibilities and exposures. And I truly hear you when you say it's our responsibility and duty as programmers and as gatekeepers and stewards of participation that we continually find avenues to provide. And it's one of the things that probably strikes me as a difference between the opportunities in Europe with, say, the UK and Ireland, even at grassroots and teenage level and youth level, is that if you're not at the elite level, there are still less competitive avenues for you to continue to participate. And that's something that we have a challenge, I think, in the US in terms of if you're not on the school team or the elite team, there's not very many other options. And I think it's a gap in the system, like you're saying, in terms of where we can continually provide more opportunities at whatever level, a kid is at, or a youth, or even an adult.
I think outside of specific pathways in my sport, there's a lot of tournaments that you can play in, especially doubles tournaments.
Okay.
And they don't care how old you are. Cody started playing when he was 12. My daughter, I think she started playing when they were both 11. They were playing doubles volleyball, not 6-on-6. And in order to get some competition, they had to play against women. They had to play against men. Well, luckily, our sport of volleyball isn't a contact sport. There's no fouling. It's one of the reasons some of your listeners may not realize, but the number one women's sport in the U.S. is by far at the high school level is women's volleyball. There's 500,000 girls playing high school volleyball in the country. There's like 400 or 350,000 playing basketball, and football and softball are below that even. So the opportunity to play that way is one end. But then the other joy of it being not a contact sport is that it also allows you to play co-ed. I can't begin to tell you, Claire, how many marriages have happened because of playing co-ed volleyball. And the two of them at an adult level in it, maybe 2-on-2 volleyball or 6-on-6, but they fall in love because they're both still older and being physically active and having fun playing the game. And I don't know if co-ed basketball would work, but because it's not my turf. But at the same time, I know that in our sport, because we're a non-contact game, that's why a lot of athletes choose to come to volleyball, because they don't like getting hit. They don't like the being fouled. I mean, if we added 5 fouls to volleyball, it would totally change the game. I mean, it would be crazy. Somehow you could foul somebody. But and everything we're talking about, I haven't yet mentioned, and I should, the value of the para sports. If you want to get a sponsor, we've found in the US, to feel like they're actually experiencing disabled sport, sitting volleyball lets everybody feel disabled, but not have to be in a wheelchair to do it or whatever. And when you put a ribbon or a net system down the middle of a volleyball court, you can get 3 sitting volleyball courts on one regulation court, essentially. And sponsors love being able to participate in a sport that everybody knows, volleyball, and there's only 4 rule differences essentially between the World Para Volley, the sitting game at the Paralympic level, and the Olympic level. The 4 rule differences: you can block the serve, and you can't do that in the regular game. You can touch the net except for the top, and you can't do that in the regular game. And you got to keep one cheek on the floor when you go to spike. You can't come, up on your knees or whatever to spike a ball. It's called air butt. You got to stay. Sitting volleyball. It's not get on my knees volleyball. If I, and of course some of these guys are amputees, so they can't, quote, get on their knees. It's just, I share that because if I lost a practice time because the science fair took over the gym or something and I didn't know it, I would find a place to put up a rope and just play some sitting volleyball and discover the para volley side of things that they might not understand or be aware of. And I know that when we bring in our Olympic and Paralympic sponsors to our Olympic Training Center here in the town I live in Colorado Springs, they absolutely love playing sitting volleyball. Whether it's the CEO or the secretary, that they're all kind of levels the playing field, and they have a blast, and they get an appreciation of what it's like to be disabled and play volleyball. So,
that's incredible.
Think of that pathway as another part of it, for sure. So.
What a gift, John. I'd love to quickly ask you about this challenge we have in youth sports with coaching. And it's that we have a kid, and if they're playing more than one sport, we can sometimes see the coach from each of the sports so much juggling, tussling, grappling for time with that kid, and almost, I'll say, poaching them towards that sport, but it becomes challenging. And there's this sense of the child is left in the center, the parent is frustrated trying to bring them to X practice and this practice, but they'll get cut if they don't make this practice, but they have a conflicting practice with another sport. It's a very challenging situation, and maybe your thoughts on that. Have you come across it, or any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one. I think when you put the child first over your program, you let the child decide and let your program decide whether that's enough or not enough at the level that you've got this athlete training and competing with you. I personally love multi-sport athletes. At a volleyball specific level, we don't want to specialize. We want players that are good at all 6 skills and maybe great at 1 or 2, but good at every skill. And an athlete who is being doubly physically active, I would completely support their doing whichever it is because it's the kid's choice, it's not the program's choice. There are programs that say you must commit at this level, and if you can't, we're going to have to drop you. And I respect that, and that's what they choose to do if they want to do it. But for me, because I look at every athlete as an individual, I'm making sure that my programming allows for multi-sport athletes to be doing both. That's at one level. At the higher principle level, if you chose basketball over my sport of volleyball, I have not failed, and I'm not your last coach. You're still doing sport. And in this country, we might say I'm going to just give big, huge numbers. I'm going to say there's 50 million kids, and I'm going to say maybe 20 some odd million of them do sports. If you chose basketball over volleyball, and I have a hole in my team, I'm looking for the other 30 million kids who aren't doing a sport and not being threatened or upset that you chose basketball. There's millions of kids to get out there and bring into my program. So anytime a kid moves on from volleyball to another sport, it's totally great. That's the kids, and maybe the parents' choice too. But you see, as a young coach, I said, my kids won this. Well, coach, if you're listening, they're not your kids. You do not take them to school. You don't house them. You don't feed them. You don't do their homework. You don't take care of them when they're sick. You just coach them. They are the parents' kids, not yours. So when they choose a different sport than mine, that's fine. I've got lots of other kids, that 30 million to pick from and bring into being active, because they're not being active in the value of sport. And that's where I need to go look more and not feel poached or whatever else.
Love that. John, do you think that when we think of the volunteering in youth sports and the shortage of coaches, do you think that most anybody could be a coach of a child in a sport if they wanted to be? Is it possible that they can be a coach?
100%. Because coaching isn't about the skill and tactics as much as it is about developing the kid and the whole kid and their leadership, like I've said before, and their ability to be a teammate, and their developing of resilience, and their creating a good attitude. Those are not sports specific, The things that I can control in my sport of volleyball, the only thing I can control is the serve. But I can control other things like my attitude and my effort. And, you could probably make a list of about 10 things. The way I communicate with you, that's in my control. I can learn to be a better communicator. And it doesn't take a volleyball expert to teach me those things. It takes somebody that's a good parent or a good teacher. And specifically because of the internet, that you can always show great models in a sport that you don't play or have any idea how to play. But if you catch them being good and you reward their effort and you know the whole kid, and you find out that their favorite number is 8 and you make sure that they have the number 8 when they go to play, that doesn't take any coaching skills. That's because you know the kid. And I do say I would want you to be able to model something without the ball, if it's a ball sport, to be able to show what it looks like, because you want to see it and then do it and then talk, have feedback loop around it as you see it, then do it in a motor skill, simple learning pattern. But you don't bring the ball in. You just want to be able to say, this is what it generally looks like, and give them a concept, but let them develop themselves in their own uniqueness. That's what this whole constraint-based learning and ecological dynamics is about. That, you should bring on a good expert on that and let them share those ideas. But so I sometimes joke and say my grandmother could probably have coached the women's Olympic team to a medal. And I say that not because of my grandma's phenomenalness. It's because those 23, 24 athletes that are cutting down to 12 are so good and so passionate that the coach gets the benefit of all the passion and everything. And the coach really needs, again, to find out more about the kid. I mean, I'll share something pretty important, I think. So Cody was cut from the team, didn't make the last chance to play, and disappointed. I think he flew to Costa Rica with his girlfriend, his fiance, and they kind of chilled and said, "Oh, I came close," or whatever. But we have a new coach, and that coach is Karch Kurai. And Karch was the women's gold medal coach in Tokyo. And as a player, he won 3 gold medals, including the '84 Olympics. Well, so now he's going to coach our 2028 men's Olympic team, because they're in the games of Los Angeles without having to fight their way in like everybody else does. I mean, there's a lot of people may not realize there are 221 countries trying to get to the Olympics, and 12 do, and the other, 210 stay home. So getting in is harder than anything else. But for LA, we're in. And so he has left the women's program to coach the men, kind of bookending his career from when he won a gold as a player in Los Angeles 48 years before, or whatever it would be, And I share that because he talked to my son, and Cody said 20% was about volleyball. 80% of the 2-hour conversation was about family, life, dreams, goals. Why am I still playing volleyball? What do I want to do when I leave volleyball? Again, the person and not the player. So all of us can develop the player, I think.
That's truly incredible, John. And I know you're super passionate about the outdoors and the importance of being outdoors and getting kids to play, but getting people to play. And I'd love you maybe to share about how some of the things that you're working on in terms of projects that you're working on, and in terms of how that maps to outdoors.
Yeah, well, it's kind of funny. We just had a new International Federation Congress, and I am now a member, as I used to be, but I'm back doing the FIVB Development Commission, which is their grassroots. How do you develop the sport around the world? And I've been working with a wonderful program called the Let's Keep the Ball Flying Foundation. And we've got a free coaching app for a phone, because everybody has a phone, on how to do a lot of what we talked about, specific to volleyball, but how do we make the game fun, and how do we make them learn faster? Because probably 80% of the games are played around the world outdoors. And so how do you build an outdoor court, and how do you create opportunities to play, and how do you make kids love volleyball? In my sport, the tradition is to start teaching this thing called forehand passing, where you hit it off your arms. And as a young coach, I would say, can't pass, can't hit. But that's not the way you get kids to love volleyball. You get kids to spike first, and then when they have come to love the chance to jump and try and hit the ball over this ribbon or this rope or this net or whatever, then you teach them the stuff that, you got to be able to serve receive to be able to hit it, but we're going to have you hooked by playing the fun thing in our sports. So any sport should do that. And all of that led to uh, I live in Colorado, and I'm looking out here, and there's a 5,000-meter peak called Pikes Peak, covered in snow. And I fish and I hunt and I ski and I do all these things that my father taught me, and I've taught my kids. And so my wife and I bought a property up about an hour away out of this town called Bison Peak Lodge. I don't know, on the screen you can see bisonpeaklodge.org, and it says come heal with us, because what we do is we help first responders of any sort and veterans heal from their PTSD situation. And they do it in no small part because of the activities that we provide up in this valley in the wilderness. Because we have a lodge and we have an event center, we have lodging and blah, 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 a good, wonderful kitchen. But we can fly fish and we can look through telescopes in the dark sky, and we can do 3D archery targets, and we can hike, and we can play cornhole, and we can, do all sorts of things. And we've had some of our Olympic teams come up to the property to get ready for the Olympics in a different way. Because you can't take it with you, One of my best friends, the now sadly late Matt McShane, taught me so much about our sport as we coached together. But just 2 weeks ago, while I was in Bangkok, I got a call from his wife, and he passed away in the kitchen at the young age of 70. And it made me realize, that more than just what we're talking about here, that the humanness and being mortal is part of what why I continue to give back to our sport. Because when you do that through the work like you're doing with Cool and the people you're bringing on to share ideas, it's called a rising tide lifts all boats,
Yes.
and that idea, whether it's for my sport of volleyball or, I'm also got put on the World Paravolley Coaching Commission and stuff like that. But it's, through sport, we make incredible friends, we make incredible partners, and at the same time, we impact the lives of so many kids. I would challenge your listeners to kind of say, if you had to tell a parent why you're coaching and what you're going to do, two things come to mind. One would be that I'd put my mission and vision statement on the door of the gymnasium or on the entrance to my field or whatever, so we all get reminded about why we're doing this. And we can go back when we have to make a decision to those principles, those vision and mission of why we're doing it. And at the same time, it lets me, in the case of this Bison Peak, share the joy of fishing and being in the outdoors and the things that John Muir, an American wilderness guy, and all these other people that, in the wilderness, you find a lot of ways to heal. So since we can't take it with us, that's what I do in my spare time.
You're still moving, you're still embracing the joy of movement and play in the outdoors. It's truly remarkable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. When you have to go on a hike on a trail that's, no trail is perfect, they're incredibly uneven, and you have to learn to balance and do all that stuff. And somewhere back in the 80s, I played overseas in Italy, and we did a thing called the Topolino Cup, the Mickey Mouse Cup, and Walt Disney was involved. And I have this comic book that I still love that showed the ideal small-sided team, Huey, Dewey, and Louie. They were coached by Goofy, and they learned to pass, set, and hit, and do all these games. But they also, part of their warm up and stuff was to go, hike around the stream and walk around and, and be in the outdoors. And so many of our sports, most of the countries that I work in, they have a handful of indoor courts and the rest of them are outdoor. And those places you can go to, they're playing volleyball. It's just one of the things you can do when you're outdoors. And of course, there's no ceiling, and so you can serve a sky ball as high as you can into the air because you aren't trapped by a roof or whatever. But I hope I've shared some ideas that'll help your listeners be just a little bit better coach.